Good morning, tiny people. Here we go for maybe the last time or close to it. Here we are talking about the United States government. Now, again, this is one of these lessons which is so critical because so few people nowadays understand civics, understand how government is set up. You hear so many people, again, screaming about, well, I have the right to this and I have the right to that, but they really haven't got a clue how the government is set up. We knew at the start of the country, the framers of the Constitution said we definitely do not want a monarchy. Monarchy is kind of a silly form of government. I mean, the oldest son of the last leader of the country gets to be the new leader of the country. Well, what if the last leader of the country had a son who was an idiot? What if the person is corrupt? What if they're just downright evil? What if that person is greedy or slothful or go through any of the deadly sins? And if that describes the person who's going to be king, the country is in for a pretty rough time. So that's a terrible way to choose a leader just by birth. Incidentally, a little fun fact for a little bit more than half the population in the world, and that is Britain has finally changed their laws as of about, I don't know, half a dozen years ago. It's no longer the oldest male child, it's now the oldest child, so that a girl can be just as much in the front of the line to receive the crown as a boy can from this time forward. So it's not monarchy. That's not what we wanted here. Also, we didn't want to have just a pure democracy. This is not now. It has never been intended to be a democracy. A democracy means, oh, we're just going to take a quick vote here, and whatever the majority of the people decide, boom, zap, that's it. We're going to do it. You got a picture of a lynch mob there. And you know what? The majority of the people said, we think this guy's guilty. Why don't we go out and hang him? And so they did. Well, that doesn't seem like much of a rule of law, and the Americans felt very strongly that way. What they decided on was a representative government. I'm talking about the framers of the Constitution. They said, look, we can't have everyone leave their farms and leave their towns and get together somewhere in order to vote on everything. So what we need to have specific groups of people. The states are an obvious choice, and it's states that appoint senators. Also, when you have enough people inside any state, we'll kind of group them together in what's called congressional districts. And those people can elect one person to speak on their behalf, to watch out for their interests, to make sure that somebody has got their lives in their minds, make sure somebody has got their best interests at heart. Now, those representatives go to Washington. It becomes a full-time job. And they go and they can debate the issues and they can look up the finer points. And since it's a full-time job, they can dedicate themselves to really finding out what's inside the laws that they're talking about. Two sides of a thing can look so different. There are still countries that like monarchy. There are still countries that think the ideal of government is democracy. And then there's us. We like representative government. We're more like that picture on the right. The father of the Constitution is that handsome young guy who has hair probably like your grandmother. That's James Madison. And he was the one who went to Philadelphia to the convention and already had the idea of a framework of government in mind. And we said that a constitution is exactly that, a framework of government. Like when someone's putting up a house, they don't start by putting up the siding and then work their way in. No, the first thing you see is the general shape, the idea of what the house will look like. Then all the eaves and the gutters and the soffits and the electrical and the wiring and the plumbing, that's all put in there later. So that's what James Madison had. He said, hey, let's set this thing up so that it can last a long time. He said, we need separate powers. And this is the plan that was eventually adopted. Separate powers. That means we don't want to give too much power to any one part of the national government. And remember, when we talk about the US Constitution, we're only talking about the national government, those folks down in Washington, D.C., not the folks in Madison or Springfield, Illinois, or any other state capital, just the ones in Washington, D.C. Well, if you look at the tree there, that's exactly the idea. Three branches. The first, the one in the center, is the legislative. And the Constitution says all lawmaking powers shall be vested in a Congress of the United States. It is only the Congress that is supposed to make laws. That's what legislative means, from lex legis, the Latin word which means law. So the Congress is made up of two different parts. They had a great big debate as to, well, how many votes should each state get? And the states that had a lot of people said, well, we think it should be by the number of people in the states. So Virginia, for example, should get way more votes than little tiny Rhode Island. And Rhode Island said, well, no, each state is like a separate country, so we should each have an equal say. They debated and debated and debated and finally came up with the idea that we should do both. And so Congress is split into two houses. In the House of Representatives, the number of votes a state has depends on the population of the state. The number of senators in the other House of Congress is the same for each state. It's 2 senators per state. The second part of the federal government would be the executive branch. Now, the job of the executive is to enforce the laws that have been made by Congress. And the person who embodies this, the person in charge of this, is the president. But clearly, he does not do it by himself. Barack Obama, Donald Trump, George Washington, they didn't strap on a gun and go patrol the streets of the United States making sure laws were enforced. No, there's all kinds of people that help them, starting from the cabinet, those people that advise the president and run different parts of the government, all the way through to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the Marine Corps, all those good folks, federal marshals and CIA and, oh my goodness, FBI, all kinds of folks that are helping the executive to enforce the laws. Then there is the judicial. The job of the judicial is to interpret the laws. Remember how we said that if somebody came up to me and spoke to me in Danish, I wouldn't have any idea what they were saying because I do not speak Danish. But there are people that speak both. So I would have to go get an interpreter, someone who understands both languages. And what the Supreme Court does is it interprets the letter and the intent of the law. The job of the Supreme Court is to say, well, what does this law actually mean? And let's apply it to cases. And the Supreme Court only speaks when they have an actual case in front of them. They don't just give opinions. But they also need help. Couldn't be just one court for all the cases that would arise in a country having to do with the federal government and federal laws. So there are lots of other federal courts. Then when they had a balance of powers, the 3 branches each had a part of the power of government. Ooh, teeter-totter horror stories. Come on, you've all been there. Look at this little bum over here on the left. I mean, come on, look at that kid with the striped shirt. You know what he's about to do, don't you? I think he's kind of up there, and I think he's going to bail. But he's not going to bail now. He's going to wait till he gets back down again. And that poor little guy in the plain red shirt, he's going to be up top. Then old Stripes there is going to jump off, and that kid's going to come down and pound the old butt and be in pain. Well, what happens is if you don't have a balance, if you don't keep a child on either side, the thing gets out of whack. Someone could get hurt, power shifts, somebody becomes kind of more important than somebody else. We didn't want that to happen. And so we put checks on the power of the different branches of government. And I'm just going to run through a few of these, which are the most famous, probably the most often used, or at least the most in the news lately. The veto. The veto is a power that the president has on the Congress, on the legislative branch. And that is, if the president feels that Congress has passed a bad law, then he can veto it. It's a Latin word which means I forbid. And that law can't go into effect until the Congress has looked at it and the president's complaints and they have voted again. They can override the veto and still make it a law, but to do that, they have to get many, many more votes. It takes 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate instead of just a simple majority, half plus one, in order to override a presidential veto. Then there's judicial review, where we talked about Marbury versus Madison this year, where the Supreme Court looked at an act of a president and said, no, that's unconstitutional. That's gone. You can't do that. You have to do what's constitutionally proper. And they claimed that right of judicial review to look at laws and actions of government when cases came up. And if they declare them unconstitutional, they're gone. Then there is impeachment, which has been gone through in this country 3 times now. Andrew Johnson, the president right after Abraham Lincoln back in the 1860s. Then Bill Clinton in not too many years ago. What would that be? The late 90s, early 2000s? Yeah, it must have been early 2000s. And Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson were each found not guilty. The third person now to have been impeached was Donald Trump. And Donald Trump also was found not guilty. And those are some of the checks on the power to make sure that, unlike the teeter-totter, no one can take charge and kind of let go of the others and become more powerful themselves. Here's an important little bit of information that you need this year, because people got all upset in 2016 because Hillary Clinton received more votes than Donald Trump, yet she was not elected. Donald Trump was clearly, legally, properly elected president because states elect the president. The people do not directly elect the president. Each state gets a number of electors, that is, people who vote on its behalf, and it's a small number. And it's the number of congressmen. I think Wisconsin has 9, and then the 2 senators, that's 11. So Wisconsin would have 11 votes for Congress, or excuse me, for president. And this gives the smaller states more say in choosing the president. That is why there's an electoral college. If we simply went by the population in each state and voted that way, then I believe it's only a total of 7 states now which could potentially elect a president. And the other 43 states would just be out of luck. They'd have no say in it. So that's why there is an electoral college. So when you think about the presidential election this coming year, in November, the people will vote and they will probably declare on the news who's going to be the winner, but the president has not been elected that night. As a matter of fact, it's generally early December when the Electoral College gets together and they cast the votes that actually count. And then one of the people is elected president of the United States. They can tell by the map and how the Electoral College is set up, how many electoral votes that each candidate is receiving, so they are not wrong when they tell you who it's going to be. I have seen a couple of bad predictions, though, in elections. I was walking to school one morning, and there was a newspaper, a Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which was sitting out across the street next to a mailbox of the fellow that lives over there and a little bit south on Brookfield Road, and it very clearly said, Gore beats Bush. So that was kind of an interesting one, because there's never been a President Gore. It was the elder Bush. All right, tiny people, it has been all kinds of a pleasure. And because I love you much, I'm sending you a party package. It's on the way. And hey, it's going to be incredible. So hasta la vista, babies. And we will talk to you soon. And I really, really, really hope I will see you soon. So long, guys and gals.